acquaintances with this, thank you very much, august group of historians. It's not actually my first time to return to the coast since I died in 1878. The first time was in 1996, when I was invited by St. Mark's Episcopal Church to come and to address the congregation there during their sesquicentennial. The church was founded in 1846, so 150 years later they had a sesquicentennial celebration, and they invited me, Dr. William Houston Tegarden, to come and speak. And you might wonder why, and I'll explain that in a minute. But there were a couple of other people that they invited to speak. One was Jefferson Davis. And there's a connection between Davis and the church. I didn't see him speak, but I heard a number of people say that they saw a resemblance to some media mogul like named John Hash. I don't know if that was true or not. And the other speaker was Reverend Henry Harrison Sneed. And I heard the same thing, that he looked like a guy named John B. Sneed, his great-grandson, I understand. Reverend Sneed was the longest-serving rector at St. Mark's from I'm thinking this is right, from about 1908 to 1927, the longest-serving rector until James Beauregard Roberts came along, and he broke that record, and he served 44 years at St. Mark's. So, that was my first time to come back and visit the coast after my death. I've been back a couple of times since then. And I always enjoy coming back, although I must say tonight I got a little bit lost finding, which is why I was a little late, I'm so glad you had some business, finding the West Side Community Center. Now, I don't know about Jefferson Davis, and I don't know about Reverend Henry Harrison Sneed, but I can prove to you that I am William Houston Tegarden, because look, there is the portrait that's hanging at St. Mark's Church of William Houston Tegarden. And but for the white hair and the much more stylish coat, you can tell that's one and the same if you add about 160 years onto my earlier portrait. So I am Dr. William Houston Tegarden. So who am I? Well, I was born in 1793 in Kentucky. And I came down, after I grew, I came down to New Orleans to study medicine. And I became a doctor. Unfortunately, I was pretty sick. I had severe dyspepsia, and I had liver disorder, and some described me as a bag of bones. Not like you see me today. And so I figured I'd better get out of New Orleans, which was a pretty unhealthy place then, and I don't know about today, but it was very unhealthy then, especially in the summertime. I'm sure you all know why. So I came to this Mississippi Gulf Coast in 1834. I came here. And I'm known as one of the founders of Mississippi City. There was a small group of us. I was one of the founders. My son-in-law, J.J. McCollum, who married our daughter Sarah, was another founder of Mississippi City. So we got together and we had a vision. Let me say that. We had the vision that we would establish a city with a great port that would rival the port of New Orleans. That was the dream that we had. And that small group of investors and visionaries created Mississippi City, and its charter was issued in 1837, the first charter issued by the state to any city here on the Gulf Coast. So you could say Mississippi City was the first city. Now, there were, of course, cities that had been in existence long before that. The following year, the state issued charters to Biloxi and Pass Christian and to Pascagoula. But Mississippi City was the first charter. I was a doctor, but I wore many hats. I think I'll take this off for now. I wore many hats. Obviously a developer, obviously a doctor. You probably know me well as a hotelier, because I owned and ran the Tegarden Hotel in Mississippi City. A grand old hotel, a frame hotel, large. And that's kind of what I was most known for. Now, back to the founding of Mississippi City, with that great, great vision. That was in 1837. We sold bonds and we created the plat of Mississippi City. And things were going pretty well. And in 1840, the effort was made to have the legislature decide that the University of Mississippi would be in Mississippi City. I'm sure you all have heard that story. So things were really, really, really looking good. And then the Great Depression and financial crisis in the late 30s and 1840 hit. And frankly, that was the end of our great dream at the time. And this is not an apocryphal story. There were people who took their bonds and wallpapered their walls with their bonds. That's how worthless they became because of the Depression in 1840. So obviously we never built the port. The grand plan was to bring the railroad down from Canton, and the southern terminus would be right there, coming right down Railroad Street, down Mississippi City, and the terminus would be there at the port. Great plan. But as I say, that plan did not come to fruition then. So does it surprise you when I say it was to come down Railroad Street from the north to the south? Well, that street's been changed. The name is not Railroad Street anymore because a little bit later in 1841, when we became the county seat, we built a courthouse, a log courthouse on Railroad Street, and the name was changed to Courthouse. And then a few years later, that log courthouse was replaced with a brick courthouse. So that's what's called Courthouse Street. People always ask me, well, how do you spell your name? Mayor, you know it's spelled right on the signs, the street signs. But that apartment complex there, they've got it wrong. It's not T-E-A, it is T-E-G-A-R-D-E-N. So I'm telling you about the fact that I came to New Orleans when I was quite sick. And I remember very distinctly speaking to an old Choctaw hunter, very old, who told me the secret of the Indians, of the Choctaw. That the springs that were near the ocean to the east of Mississippi City had great healthful powers. And if I would drink from the springs by the ocean across that bay, that I would be healed. And in fact, I was. I think it was more this wonderful climate. You know how cool it is in the summer here compared to New Orleans. But it was the fish diet, and it was the spring water from those springs over there by the ocean. And from that time on, I always had a bottle of that spring water next to me, and I drank from it all day, every day. And indeed, not quite as good. When I built the hotel, by the way, was on what you now call Tegarden Road. South of those railroad tracks, which of course were not there when the hotel was there, pretty much at the end of 16th Street. The only streets open in Mississippi City in those early days in the 1840s were 16th Street, Railroad, now Courthouse, Texas, Arkansas, and maybe one over there another by Texas. So those were the only streets that were open, and my hotel was on the eastern end of 16th Street, pretty much at the end of the street. As a doctor, I got to see people all up and down the coast. By the way, Mrs. Shaw, I don't know about the time issue here, so make sure I don't get too far.
We have plenty of time.
Well, so knowing the springs over there by the ocean, and knowing many patients over there, having many patients over there, I learned that the springs had great medicinal effects, yes, but also another effect, at least I attributed that to the springs. I remember very clearly in a period of about 18 months, 8 couples had twins in that area, in the immediate area over there. 8 sets of twins. So when I got my hotel going, it's all about marketing, isn't that right? I advertised that if you would come and stay for 1 year at the Tegarden Hotel, and you would partake of the natural phosphorus of the fish diet, and you would drink the water from the springs by the ocean, if you weren't cured from whatever ailed you at the time you came, your board would be completely free. And I had many people take me up on that. Many people. Couples. And none of them asked for their money back when they left. But more than one couple left with a set of twins. So I firmly believe that that's the magic of the old Indian Springs. I said I wore many hats, so let's see. I've talked about doctor and hotelier, a developer, obviously. If you look at your land records here at your courthouse, you'll see my name and my brother's name spread all over, the deeds. I had another one that probably most people don't know about, another occupation, another hat that I wore. And that was as a ferry owner and operator. I operated a free ferry to cross Bernard's Bayou in the city of Hansborough to get across the bayou, and you can imagine why I opened it, not only to get the goods and so forth, foods and so forth that I needed for the hotel, but also my guests to cross across the bayou. So that's another hat that I wore. We had an orchard there. So you could, and we delivered primarily grapes. My son-in-law, J.J. McCon, he had a lot of orchards over in the Long Beach area, but we supplied vegetables and fruit, primarily fruit, to New Orleans. So that was another hat that I wore. About that free ferry, I'll get back to that, because that's kind of an interesting story. So, as I said, the great vision was to establish a port, really a great port, to rival the port of New Orleans. And and that's what we presented to the legislature. So we got our charter, and the legislature, one of the legislators stood up, and this was quoted in the New Orleans newspaper. I can remember it. Made me a little nervous. It said, I'm going to quote this because I got it here, that they're going to, the legislature is assisting us in establishing a port to rival New Orleans, and quote, now I'm quoting this from the New Orleans newspaper, save us from the odious vassalage to New Orleans. Odious vassalage. Of course, that's famous. Anybody north of the New Orleans on the river, they had to sort of pay the tribute to New Orleans from time immemorial. So, you know that the financial crisis came. The legislature has apparently never changed. A dastardly deed and a backstabbing trick. The University of Mississippi was put in some podunk town up in the northern part of the state, Oxford, Lafayette County. Can you imagine how crazy that was then and still is today? And can you imagine what that university would be like if it were here? Just imagine. By one vote, through a dirty deed and training in the legislature, we lost the university. Well, yeah, the great vision of a port to rival New Orleans, that didn't come to fruition, but you know what did. Mississippi City became what you would call, I guess, tourist. You'd call it a tourist place. We called it at the time watering hole. All the rich people from New Orleans and from the Delta, primarily from the Natchez area, they had to get out of town and out of the area in the summertime because of the yellow fever. And they would they would send their horses, they would send their slaves, they would send their household goods from New Orleans or from Natchez or the Delta down to here and to stay the entire summer until the yellow fever season ended. And then they'd go back home. but they came with their entire household. Well, I guess they left some at home, but it seemed like they came with their entire household because they took up so much room. The slaves, the horses, all that. So these hotels, Tegarden's hotel was not the only one. There was the Barnes Hotel further to the east on Texas Avenue, a grand hotel. Now, I have to say, it was a grand hotel. It was a brick structure, had buildings in the back. It had this horse stables. It had, like I did at my hotel, the bachelor's quarters, and a grand brick hotel. And mine was a grand wood frame hotel. But we had bachelor's quarters. I had a billiard salon and a 10-pin alley also behind the hotel. And it was a grand hotel. I'm actually going to quote to you from the New Orleans Daily Delta and the May 1850 story, which says, here in Mississippi City, it's written from Mississippi City, but so it says here, but the byline was Mississippi City, our learned friend Dr. Tegarden has a pleasant home, they called it, large enough to entertain a dozen families in a style of substantial comfort. That pretty accurately describes my hotel. Not a home, but my hotel. And we had many families that came back year after year after year in the summertime. Why did they come in the summertime? Well, I told you to escape the yellow fever. But it was also for the delightful breezes coming off of the water. There was a lighthouse down at the shore. And the ladies in their sometimes large hoops, I don't know how they did it, large hoops, they'd go up to the top of the lighthouse to see the view and to catch those breezes coming off of the water. So to them, coming from New Orleans or Natchez, this was a delightful. You spoke about the air conditioning a minute ago. Yeah, the air conditioning at the time was terrific. And that's why they came to escape the yellow fever and because of the really delightful climate. We were down by the shore. You know what that meant? Yeah, we were subject to storms. Violent storms. And indeed, on September the 16th, Sunday morning of 1855, a very, very bad storm struck. Sunday morning it was like 5 or 6 a.m. The tides were 15 feet above normal. And it came ashore, and the tides and the wind, and it washed, for example, the Barnes Hotel. It washed those buildings behind it off of their foundation. It destroyed my bachelor's quarters. That storm killed 2 of my boarders at the time. 5 more were severely injured. And so that was, that happened periodically. And we rebuilt then, as I am sure you rebuild now. Another thing I remember in 1861, during the war, of course, it's pretty quiet here during the war. But in October of 1861, the 26th Massachusetts came ashore. And a stout, stretching a little bit, I was going to say a stout band of irregular Confederate cavalry came down from Hansborough to contest the Yankees coming ashore. And they were pretty quickly run off by the USS Calhoun gunboat, Union gunboat right off the shore that was throwing 12-pound shot at them. Indeed, there was a 12-pound shot ball that was stuck in a tree for years and years. I would love to know what happened to that. Anybody ever heard that story? Stuck in a tree down there, somewhere around Tegarden, from the USS Calhoun. In fact, the story that was in Harper's Weekly on October 12th of 1961, Harper's Weekly reported that federal troops had occupied Mississippi City. This is in Harper's Weekly. Occupied Mississippi City to cut communications between Mobile and New Orleans. And indeed they did. So I'm kind of rambling a little bit about my experience in Mississippi City. I was interested to hear about the graveyard with the veterans in it, and you were talking about the graveyard too, because people ought to wonder where I'm buried. I don't know if I should tell you, but the truth is I don't know because I was dead. But I firmly believe, hypothetical, that I was buried behind the Tegarden Hotel. What was, at the time I came back during the sesquicentennial of the church, Phillips Business College. Would have been right behind, or part of my property there at the Tegarden Hotel. And I actually spoke to Nan Lovett, who grew up in that area, and she said that she, as a child, played in that area, and said she could remember a wooden type tombstone, or maybe more than one. She couldn't tell me whose name it was, and maybe you couldn't even read it at the time. But that was after I formed the opinion that I just gave you, and I think it is some minor anecdotal verification of my theory that that's where my grave is. Now back to the port. As I said, the quote about odious vassalage to New Orleans made by the Mississippi legislature was reported in the Mississippi papers. I mean, in the New Orleans papers. So, you know, they were aware of the vision. And a few years after this doggone financial crisis, so this would have been about 1842, I'm thinking, and I saw it in the paper at the time, but I can't remember exactly when it was, a New Orleans paper reported that a passenger on a steamer from Mobile to New Orleans, of course coming down the Sound, announced to the other passengers as they drew abreast of Mississippi City, announced to the other passengers, "This is the great invisible city which was to rival the Crescent City." The great invisible city that was to rival the Crescent City. And everybody had a great laugh. You can imagine. But I generally like to end my talks with this. Ha! Mississippi City, of course, is now part of the great city of Gulfport and has the great state port of Gulfport. And indeed does have a port that rivals the port of New Orleans. That's how I like to end these things. Sort of who gets the last laugh. And so that's just a little bit of, my recollections from the past. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions as long as you give me the benefit of a memory that is now like 200 years old, and it's faded an awful lot. But if you've got any questions, I'd be good to try to, yes.
Did Tegarden have any relatives, other relatives?
Oh, yes, I'm so glad you asked that. Absolutely. There's still Tegardens around. And Mac McCall, who was, actually he worked at Hancock Bank for a while. He is a descendant of Dr. Tegarden. And he now is in New Orleans. And speaking of descendants, I mentioned Nan Lovett. Nan Lovett is the great-granddaughter? No, it ought to be more greats than that. Of Thomas Latimer. Thomas Latimer was an original communicant at St. Mark's in 1846. Oh boy, I really forgot something. I can come back to it. In 1846. And an original communicant. And a direct line down to Nan. And then Nan's got like 1, 2, 3, 4 more generations. So they're you go from 1846 to today, there's still descendants of original communicants at St. Mark's that worship there. So back to Jefferson Davis. This is really the best part of the story. Davis, a famous man, obviously. A friend of mine. He, of course, had, his brother had plantations in Natchez, at least in Adams County up there, and I had plantations up, Jefferson Davis had plantations up there now. So, and he would come down here with the others from the Delta area, and so I knew Jefferson Davis. Well, you know that he was in the Mexican War, the hero of the Battle of Buena Vista, where he was very, very severely injured. He took shot in his foot and lower leg. I've heard it said that he may have been the most famous man in America, or one of the most famous, because of his exploits at the Battle of Buena Vista. And he was a congressman before the war, and was a Mississippi at-large congressman. So we were part of his area, and he was down here soliciting votes at the time and so forth. So I knew him. But his injury was so severe, he had to use a cane. Now, sorry about throwing this around. You know, it was a dangerous place then. We had to be ready. And he had to use a cane for 5 years. But after about 5 years, he was recovered from his injuries sustained in 1847 at the battle. And he was down here speaking on the stump for Franklin Pierce, to get Pierce elected. And you all know that Pierce got elected and then appointed Jefferson Davis Secretary of War. So during one of those, he was down here talking to the people in Mississippi City, the real population centers. Mississippi City, Hansborough. He might have gone over to Biloxi, but I kind of doubt it. So he was down here talking, and he was recovered. And he was at my table in the Tegarden Hotel. We were great friends. And he said, I am going to make a thank offer, give a thank offer for my recovery from my injuries. Finally, 5 years later, severe injuries. Sitting at my table in the Tegarden Hotel. And we raised our glasses. And he pledged $5,000 for the building of, for building a church for the Episcopalians in Mississippi City. And not to be outdone, I pledged to give the land. So Mrs. Tegarden and I gave the land there on 16th Street in Mississippi City to St. Mark's Church. Now, St. Mark's and the other churches in Mississippi City had been worshiping in a log chapel or log church, kept burning down. So it was a wonderful thing to have the ability through a princely gift of $5,000 from Jefferson Davis, and the gift from my wife and me. By the way, I'm a Methodist. Pretty close, first cousins, maybe twice, first cousins to Methodists and Episcopalians. So I gave the land, and Jefferson Davis gave the money, and that was in 1852. While he was down here stumping for for Franklin Pierce. And the church was built 1851. The church was built by 1855. 1855 is when the church was built. It had been 9 years it had been here in Mississippi City. So that's Jefferson Davis's connection, and of course you all know this too. After the war, he came back and he was a communicant at St. Mark's, member of the vestry, senior warden at St. Mark's, attended council, and when you look at the records of the Episcopal Diocese, you see that Jefferson Davis was a delegate from St. Mark's Church at council of the Diocese of Mississippi. So that's the Jefferson Davis connection and the Tegarden connection with St. Mark's Church, which I think is pretty cool. Thank you very much. I'm so glad I could come. I appreciate your invitation.
Right,
Oh, yes, sir.
we've got some time.
One quick question. What is your lineage? How did you get your name? And how did Tegarden get together for Tegarden?
That part is in it. Yeah, my dad never told me. But if you happen to go on what you all call, what do you call that thing where you get all the information in the world?
The internet.
Okay, yeah. If you go on there, you'll find some, but not a lot, of Tegardens. There are some Tegarden descendants still here, and I think Texas maybe, but perhaps my memory will clear up by the next time I talk. Yes, sir.
You said you were going to say something about the Hansborough Fair.
Yeah, I was. I'm telling you, the memory is awful after 200 years. George can tell you it is. Listen now. Well, when you do this research, you dig, everywhere you can. You don't know where some of these gems will be hidden. So I know an attorney, and I said, after I got all this, a lot of this stuff comes from Mr. Stevens' work and from the, various newspaper stuff. And I thought, I wonder what the court records would show. So lo and behold, William Houston Tegarden versus so-and-so. And that case was all about this interesting factual situation, where Tegarden was running this free ferry across Bernard's Bayou. And a man bought the land around, which would be around Bridge Street today, that you had to use to get to the ferry. And he stopped allowing people to go, or wanted to charge them to cross to use my free ferry. And I sued him. I was not an unfamiliar personage in the courts. Neither was my brother. And so I sued him on the theory, which my lawyer thought was a good, and I went and I did too, that, hey, we've been using this for a long time. The public had established the right by prescription to continue to cross the property because they had been doing it for so long. Right? And the court didn't agree. The Mississippi Court, High Court of Errors and Appeals, ruled against me. So the free ferry was no longer mine, and there was no longer a free ferry, and the ferry people got charged from there on. Back after your storm in 2005, St. Mark's Church was trying to decide what to do. Rebuild on my land there and my wife's land on 16th Street in Mississippi City, or get away from the water where it's safe. And one of the arguments made was this. We have this great history here, which we've talked about a lot tonight. But you know, if we move to this land that we're talking about there, north of Bernard Bayou Bernard, you will find oak trees there that were there long before Tegarden in his hotel. And under those limbs, Dr. Tegarden drove many a day, a wagon, his horse, to bring the guests and the goods and the foods to Tegarden Hotel. So we believe, even in our new location there on now Cowan Road, that we've still got a strong Tegarden connection. And, of course, we still have Dr. Tegarden's portrait hanging up there in the vestibule. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Who was the senator that took his walking cane and beat the scallywag that voted Ole Miss to be up north and put him in the hospital?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't remember.
I can't.
Yeah.
George?
That was your son-in-law.
Yeah, you just don't want it.
I recall that now. Yeah.
The vote was in favor of Mississippi City, but it changed on a deal the night before. And your son-in-law was a member of the legislature and beat the hell out of the guy to change the vote.
Great story. Thank you, sir.
Now,
We did.
Paul German and my great-great-grandfather, James German, served in Mexico with Jefferson Davis.
Mm-hmm.
He come back from Mexico, lived in Mississippi City, Hansberry area. Civil War come along, joined the Confederacy. The government sent his pension check every month to his wife in Mississippi City while he fought in the Confederacy.
Wow. Fantastic. Yes, sir.
What eventually became the hotel, and did you take a photograph of it when you were there?
No, I didn't. I've never seen a photograph of it. I do know what became of the hotel. It was sold. Like I say, I died in 1878. The reason I know that within quite a bit of accuracy is the New Orleans paper had a story. They interviewed an invalid, they called him, who said he had come over and stayed at the Tegarden Hotel and told that whole story that Dr. Tegarden had told him about Push Utube, the Choctaw hunter who had said to Tegarden, go drink the waters of the springs in what you now call Ocean Springs, the spring, Indian spring called Chanaha. I can never say it. Chanaha. And that was printed in the New Orleans paper. And he said at the time, old gentleman, Dr. Tegarden, old gentleman in his mid-80s. And we have the date of that, and I have a deed from Tegarden that my notes reflect sort of editorial comment. This sure looks like estate planning, that he was sort of transferring his property to children in 1878. So he had to be 85 about then, and I think that's about it. And I have followed the records. Unfortunately, a bunch of my stuff was lost in the storm. It was down at the church, but there was the building was sold to somebody, and I think the hotel closed. I didn't think it continued as a hotel after that, but I don't know the specifics about that.
Can you reiterate for me exactly where the hotel was?
No.
I know you said 16th Street.
Yeah, I can be this exact.
Okay.
From the intersection of 16th Street and Tegarden Road to the current railroad tracks, in between there.
Okay.
That's about all I can say. My belief is it would be closer.
I'm thinking historical marker. You know me.
My belief, I mean, it was a billiard salon and the bowling alley behind it, and the bachelor's court, a big space. My guess would be the grounds probably, would have gone to the water. It was even before the Shell Road, of course, at that time. And then how far up, I don't really have any idea. But it's a pretty big piece of property. So you could put a marker there. I would, because the 16th Street went right down to the courthouse. It was first built in 1841 as a log courthouse. Pretty sure it was a direct line, more or less, hotel to the courthouse. But I'm just guessing about that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for being with us.
Mrs. Shaw, thank you very much.